deep quiet of the pre-dawn hours settles around you like a cool, damp cloth. You do not need an alarm. The rising rhythm of the city is dictated by something far older than clockwork, the needs of life and labor. You rise slowly, moving through the coolness of your sleeping quarters. The air inside smells faintly of packed earth and smoke from last night's cooking fire. This early movement is accustomed, a quiet flow that barely stirs the settled dust. Your bare feet make little sound on the packed mud floor. You walk towards the dye courtyard. The first thing you notice is the temperature. It is low, a gentle, profound chill that seems to seep up from the ground and into your bones. Everything is wrapped in this coolness, giving way only slightly as the sun begins its slow ascent in the eastern sky. The indigo vats wait for you. They are heavy wooden structures, built solid against the earth, filled with a thick, almost viscous mash. This liquid is not just dye. It is time and patient effort, fermented leaves steeped in water, awaiting the day's work. You approach them methodically, tracing your fingers over the cool, polished wood of the surrounding platform. The air here has a specific scent, a pungent, earthy aroma that defines this place. It is the smell of fermentation, sweet decay mixed with deep vegetal matter and something mineral, almost metallic. This fragrance tells you everything about its current state, whispering of roots boiled down and months of careful tending. You begin the initial tasks. You must check the mash levels and adjust their temperature slightly to ensure they remain viable for the day's use. Some vats require a slight stirring with long wooden paddles. The liquid resists the motion just a little, moving sluggishly, like slow-flowing sap. As you stir the depths of the largest vat, observing how the fermented indigo coats the interior of the wood with a greenish film, you are reminded of the deep connection between your craft and the natural cycles around you. Life here is defined by waiting for fermentation to complete, waiting for the perfect atmospheric moment, waiting for the sun's angle to strike the damp fibers just right. The mash itself changes color as you work. At certain spots, it has a dull brown tinge, while elsewhere it retains that deep, mysterious indigo promise. You run your hand over the rim of the vat, noting the smoothness of the wood worn down by generations of hands. These vats are silent witnesses to the passage of time in Timbuktu. Moving away from the main mash, you turn your attention to smaller pots and basins set up for preparation. Here, the morning task involves boiling supplementary plant materials. You gather bundles of specific bark fragments and roots, botanicals, that do not provide the primary blue stain, but are crucial stabilizers. These woods and barks carry medicinal properties or act as mordants, assisting the indigo in binding permanently to the cloth fibers. You light a small fire in the dedicated brazier. The smell changes immediately, trading the pervasive sweetness of the fermentation for the sharp, clean scent of wood smoke and boiling water. You arrange the materials carefully in the metal pots. Boiling them slowly is an art form unto itself. It requires monitoring, not through glance, but through subtle adjustments, a quick check of the pot's level, a listening ear for any bubble that suggests overboiling or under extraction. As the water begins to steam and release its vapor, you watch the particles rise into the cool pre-dawn air. Some are thick and oily, others are fine and gray dust. You scoop up small amounts of liquid from these auxiliary boils. These brews will be mixed with the main vat mash later, bringing different characteristics, a deeper hold on the color for some parts, or an extra wash that enhances the overall sheen. This necessity for multiple steps reveals a complexity to your life. It is not enough merely to have the leaves. You must understand the forest's whole contribution. There is an inherent patience in this entire operation. You are spending time with raw potential, with things that do not yet know their purpose, the slow buildup of heat and aroma, mirroring the quiet intensity needed for a perfect dye bath. You observe the way the rising steam catches the faint, milky light filtering through the courtyard openings. It illuminates dust motes dancing in the cool air, making them seem like tiny, suspended constellations. You methodically grind hard pigments, not indigo itself, but other natural dyes meant to complement or enhance blue accents on specific garments. You use a smooth grinding stone and a pestle, working rhythmically. The SHHHK thunk sound is meditative, grounding you in the present moment. With each careful grind, the scent of pulverized earth and dried plant matter rises. This physical action becomes almost calming, separating your mind from any sense of hurry or worry about tomorrow's trade goods. These early hours belong to the quiet contract between you and the material world, providing care, precision, and deep knowledge in exchange for the breathtaking alchemy of blue. You know that this preparatory work, the boiling, the mixing, the careful temperature reading, is what makes the final color so profound. It is a dedication to process. As the sky brightens further, transitioning from deepest indigo gray to pale rose at the horizon line, you prepare your workspace for the next phase. You arrange the freshly boiled liquids and the solid supporting materials back into their designated spots. The overall atmosphere shifts with the light. The cool chill begins to lift slightly, replaced by the gentle warmth radiating off the multiple simmering pots. You pause for a moment, simply standing amidst the steam and the deep, earthy scents. You take a long, slow breath, drawing in the complex bouquet of boiled barks and sweet fermentation. This scent is your signature. It is the smell of work done meticulously before anyone else has awakened. It speaks not of struggle, but of deep, assured knowledge, the silent authority of those who coax color from nature's deepest sources. The city will soon wake with its clamor, but for now, everything here remains in that hushed, aromatic stillness, centered around the promise held within the waiting vats. The cool promise of the growing morning settled around you, a damp breath carrying faint mineral notes from the nearby river. You had finished preparing the indigo vats, and now, with the first pale gray light touching the roof tiles, your attention turned to the secondary preparations. These supporting botanicals were just as vital as the main dye mash, for they governed the permanence and stability of the blue. You walked slowly toward the large wooden cauldrons set over the low-burning fire pit that served your small compound. The wood smoke was already beginning to mix with the pungent fermentation smell, a deep, yeasty scent mixed with the earthy musk of countless roots. The first task involved several pieces of bark gathered from trees whose sap held tannins. These barks were needed not for color themselves, but to stabilize the reaction, ensuring that when the indigo pigment finally attached itself to the fiber, it would bind deeply and withstand the heat of sun and wear of use. You picked up a heavy grinding stone, its surface smoothed by centuries of hands before yours. The coolness of the river-worn basalt felt familiar under your palms as you moved toward the mortar. This movement demanded patience. There was no rush to simply grind quickly into dust. Instead, you considered the texture of the dry bark between your fingers, noting the fine ridges and rough edges where time had shaped it. The fire needed feeding. You gathered bundles of fibrous reeds that grew near the watering troughs, stacking them with careful geometric consideration so that when they burned, they would provide a steady, even heat to the cauldrons. The warmth that rose from the smoldering wood was gentle, not aggressive, promising hours of sustained labor. Positioning the bark over the moderate flames, you waited for the steam to begin rising, a delicate white haze that smelled faintly medicinal. The process of grinding was meditative in its own right. You did not simply crush the bark. You allowed the rhythmic back and forth motion of the pestle against the mortar to become a form of quiet concentration. The scent changed subtly as the materials were broken down. The sharp, vegetal odor gave way to something richer, more resinous. You observed the fine powder accumulating in the bowl, imagining this humble powder later becoming an invisible molecular bond within the cloth itself. This was the alchemical step, turning raw, solid matter into a dissolved possibility. Next came the roots and specific leaves. These were sourced not just for their visible characteristics, but for their deep knowledge of medicinal botany that accompanied them. You took handfuls of dried ginger-like rhizomes and other jungle herbs, careful to distinguish each by its unique scent profile, some pungent like wild garlic, others subtly sweet and almost woody. The goal was extraction, drawing out specific compounds without harshness or waste. Boiling was required, a slow coaxing of the color-fixing agents into the water. You adjusted the heat beneath the second vat. The water must not boil too fiercely. It must simmer, maintaining a gentle tremble across its surface. You watched the steam rise and condense momentarily on the edges of the cauldron lid, seeing the momentary dance of moisture and temperature. This slow, even temperature was key to gently coaxing the necessary tannins out of the tough roots without burning them or reducing their effectiveness. The smell in your workspace grew complex. It layered the pungent funk of the fermenting indigo vat with the sweet steam from the herbs and the sharper, almost metallic scent of boiling tannins. Breathing deeply, you allowed this confluence of odors to settle over you. These scents were not merely aromas, they were evidence of knowledge accumulated across generations, a living map of the ecology surrounding your home. Observing the way the liquids mingled in the large vats, the deeper blue from the main vat meeting the paler, brown-tinged runoff of the supporting materials, you saw a visual demonstration of harmony. The deep, primal color was being given strength by these secondary brews. The entire operation hinged on this slow blending, this careful support system that prevented failure at the final touch. After the initial boilings had completed their gentle steeping, you needed to strain the liquid carefully into smaller, holding containers. You found a piece of fine woven matting designed for filtering and began guiding the milky liquid through it. The goal was clarity, while some sediment remained at the bottom. The runoff needed to be mostly clear enough that the supporting agents were fully suspended in a usable medium. The labor required immense physical patience combined with detailed chemical knowledge. You had to judge by sight, smell, and feel, knowing when a root had yielded its maximum medicinal properties, or when a tannin concentration was sufficient. This deep understanding of Molly's flora felt like carrying an entire library of whispered secrets within your own mind. As the steam began to dissipate slightly with the morning's increase in light, you paused near the edge of your preparation area. The floor underfoot was cool and uneven earth, occasionally damp from the liquid spills. You stood quietly, hands resting lightly on the wooden rims of the cauldrons, looking at the prepared materials, the deep blue vat resting like a quiescent pool of possibility, the supporting brews settling into their own intermediate colors. You felt the weight of time in your body. The day had begun not with action itself, but with meticulous preparation. It was the accumulation of these small, careful steps that promised the extraordinary depth of color to come. Everything rested now in the liquid state, waiting for the moment they would touch the raw fiber and transform into enduring permanence. You gather the finished lengths of raw cotton, each piece still carrying a faint mineral dampness from the preparation area. The air around you is growing warmer now that the sun has risen higher, drying the mist from the cooling indigo vats. You notice the way the earlier morning chill has given way to the steady warmth coming off the packed earth floor. You lift one length of cloth, feeling its weight settle against your wrist, a cool, dense, slightly yielding heft. It is not heavy, but it possesses a remarkable substance that speaks of time spent soaking and processing. Tracing your fingertips over the surface, you detect the fine nap of the cotton fibers, now darkened by the stain. The color itself is mesmerizing. It does not shout blue, but rather seems to absorb the light, holding within its depths the richness of the deepest lagoon water just before sunset. You carry this piece carefully, mindful that handling it too roughly could disrupt the surface tension of the dye. This cloth is not simply colored. It has been saturated with a complex, living stain. You move toward the large vat where the deep blue mash rests. The liquid is thick and almost sluggish, retaining the musty, fermented perfume developed through hours of careful preparation. As you approach the edge of the vat, the scent, that combination of rich earth, decaying plant matter, and fermented indigo, rises up to greet you, familiar and grounding. It is the smell of patient labor and deep chemical change, a fragrance unique to this corner of Timbuktu that has become part of your own sensory landscape. You draw a slow breath, allowing the scent to settle in your lungs. This aroma connects you immediately back through the cycle, from the fresh jungle leaves weeks ago to the boiling barks yesterday, and now, finally, to this mature liquid depth. You begin selecting the linens that await submersion today. These are not just raw materials, they are canvases requiring attention. You count them silently in your mind, the lengths for a trade merchant's robe, the softer pieces destined for domestic use. Each piece is assessed by its weave and texture before it even touches the water. You remember the meticulous work done earlier, prepping these specific fabrics to ensure that when they absorb the stain, the dye will penetrate evenly without pooling or thinning out in patches. This consideration shows the mastery involved. It is not enough merely to dip the cloth. It must be prepared for the encounter. You step into the cool edge of the vat. The change in temperature hits you first, a sudden, deep coolness that contrasts sharply with the ambient warmth of the open air and dry sunlight. The transition from air to liquid is a subtle jolt, pulling your attention downward toward the swirling surface. Your movements become economical and measured as you begin immersing the first piece. You do not plunge it quickly. Instead, you allow the fabric to descend slowly, deliberately, letting gravity guide the saturation process. As the cloth sinks deeper into the mash, there is a gentle resistance, a slight yielding of the thick liquid around the fibers. The initial contact sends up tiny plumes of color and froth, little whispers of blue escaping the depths. You watch this transformation intently, observing how the first threads darken immediately upon meeting the fermented stain. This process requires patience that feels almost physical. You must wait for the reaction to stabilize before moving on. It is a meditation in saturated blue. You begin repeating the cycle. Pick up a sheet, angle it into the vat, and watch the slow descent. You use your hands not just as tools of labor, but as sensors, feeling the texture of the wet cotton against your skin, noticing how the fabric changes weight and structure as it becomes waterlogged with stain. Some sections are woven tighter, causing the dye to pool visibly in small pockets. Others are looser, allowing for a more gradual, even intake. Your fingers map the topography of the cloth, the cross sections of the warp threads, the intersections where the supplementary weave creates subtle textural shifts. Every one of these details must be accounted for because they will affect how the stain settles and permanency. After immersing several lengths, you pause near the edge again, allowing your body to adjust to the rhythmic motion. You look back at the vat, observing its surface as a living thing, subtly moving with slow chemical reactions within it. There is a meditative quality to watching this industrial alchemy happen naturally. This deep blue represents so much more than just pigment in moly. It speaks of connectivity, of trade routes that link your little corner workshop to the great Saharan and Niger basin economies. The consistent depth of this color means stability, wealth, and reputation. The craft demands a profound respect for time. You think about the hours that preceded this, the careful grinding of barks until they yielded their tannins, the boiling over wood fires, fueled by gathered scrub wood, creating steam-filled cloudiness, scented with roots and sap. The wait before the vats were even ready. Each stage built upon the patience required in the last. The process forces a slow understanding of causality. The action taken now guarantees the deep blue stain hours later. You continue your work, dipping lengths of sheer linen next, which behaves differently from the heavier cottons. These thinner materials accept the dye with an almost delicate eagerness. You handle them with utmost care, smoothing out any folds that might otherwise disrupt the even saturation. The light catches the wet fibers, making the blue appear translucent in places and deeply saturated in others. You pause your dipping motion momentarily just to observe the interplay of light through the darkening material. It is a study in how color interacts with varying degrees of transparency. A small shift occurs as you find yourself thinking about the guild itself. This workshop, surrounded by other worker stations, functions like an extended family dedicated to one profound knowledge. The way materials are stored, the precise arrangement of the dyeing tools, they all speak of shared, specialized understanding. You pass by a rack holding remnants of dyed cloth from earlier days. Some pieces bear faint streaks where the dye was too strong. Others show areas where the fabric failed to absorb fully. These imperfections are lessons made visible, reminders that perfection is sought through continual, watchful adjustment. The methodical rhythm, dip, wait, lift, observe, adjust, begins to quiet your internal monologue. Your focus narrows entirely onto the interaction between fiber and liquid, the slight hiss when a piece of slightly drier fabric hits the surface, the cool dampness transferring from the vat water through the cotton into your own skin, grounding you in the physical moment. You are performing an ancient ritual of transformation, one that links botanic chemistry with human skill. This repetition is not boring, it is cleansing. It washes away the hurried thoughts and leaves only the mindful presence required for mastery. Eventually, all the prepared linens have been submerged or stacked to await their full saturation period. You stand back from the main working area, letting your vision rest on the wall of blue that now dominates the central vat. The labor of immersion is complete for the moment. Your hands feel slightly cool and stained, holding the subtle marks of indigo on your skin like temporary badges of craft knowledge. The deep breath you take now is not just air, it feels charged with the quiet completion of a major segment of work, a successful passage through the crucial stage that transforms raw fiber into deeply pigmented history. You survey the materials, the clean stacks waiting for their turn, the bubbling depth of the mash, and feel the steady, calming hum of continued labor, knowing that this vibrant blue will continue to tell stories across the great trading paths long after your hands have stilled. The midday sun, when it arrives, does not blaze so harshly as one might imagine. Instead, it settles into the covered courtyard of the guild hall with a weighty warmth, filtering through woven reed mats and the gaps in the mud brick walls. You sit cross-legged on the cool earthen floor, surrounded by the steady hum of shared labor and the scents that define this corner of Timbuktu, a complex blend of wet indigo mash, drying tannins, roasted kola nuts, and the fainter, comforting smoke from a nearby cooking fire. It is here, in the guild's corner, that the true work of knowledge resides, separate from the physical toil of boiling and submerging. You watch your fellow dyers. They are not just workers, they are keepers of deep memory. Notice how their hands move, a gesture taught over generations, a specific wrist flick when they clean excess dye from a piece of fabric, or the precise angle at which they scoop water into a basin to cool a mordant preparation. Every movement seems economical, imbued with an understanding that comes only from years spent in this particular routine. The air here is thick with the history of blue itself. It is not simply a color, it is a declaration of presence, and therefore it holds weight. You observe patterns forming between them, the way two men approach the shared grinding stone without speaking, anticipating each other's needs for specific bark or root. This silent understanding is perhaps more valuable than any recipe written down, requiring only observation to be learned. You lean slightly against a cool wall, taking time merely to smell the air deeply. The fermented indigo scent is powerful, almost musky and earthy, underscored by the sharpness of freshly ground barks. It reminds you that everything here, the deep blue magic, strength of the fabric, begins as something simple, something grown and slowly broken down, like wood returning to dust. The guild hall itself tells a quiet story of endurance. The mud walls are stained with decades of spilled liquid, resisting the gradual fade of time. You consider this physical space. How does it hold the cumulative knowledge of so many hands? It is more than just shelter. It is a repository for specialized skill, accumulated across generations. You slowly pick up a scrap piece of linen left near your mat. It is slightly damp, bearing the faint patina of residual blue stain. Running your thumb over the texture, you note that some parts feel surprisingly soft, while others retain a crisp, fibrous stiffness. This difference reveals everything about how it was washed and treated, a subtle lesson in tension and release. The elder near you quietly begins peeling bark for grinding. You watch his fingers, smooth and marked by repetitive labor, strip the tough outer layer from the branch. His movements are measured, never rushed, suggesting that the material must yield its secrets slowly, piece by careful piece. This is not a race against time. It is an act of patience. You think about the roots and barks they process today. They are doing more than just stain preparation. They are enhancing permanence. You recall your own preparations yesterday, the boiling cauldrons, full of various stabilizing agents. These components work in harmony, a chemical whisper that ensures the blue color will remain deep even under the strong sun or the damp grip of washing water. The knowledge shared here is subtle and often impractical to describe with words alone. It requires demonstration. For example, how exactly one must wash excess dye off a freshly dipped piece without stripping away some of the crucial stain remains an art practiced in the runoff pools, observed through years of patient watching. You notice that those who have been members for the longest time rarely boast about their knowledge. They simply do things correctly, effortlessly. Later, as the heat begins its slow descent toward mid-afternoon, a junior dyer approaches the central basin. He is working on an excess rinse, perhaps cleaning away some tannins that were meant only to support the blue and not remain visible. You observe the specific method he uses, a repetitive motion of dipping and withdrawing the cloth at different points in the current flow. This technique ensures even rinsing, preventing any yellow or muddy residue from clouding the finished vibrancy. You realize that this constant cycle of preparation and refinement is what makes the dye so prized along the Niger trade routes. It is not merely indigo. It is a color stabilized by meticulous care and profound botanical understanding, transforming common plant life into an enduring signifier. The deep blue speaks of stability, of wealth accumulated slowly, like the depth of the mash itself. The air subtly changes as the midday sun shifts its angle. Dust motes, illuminated by shafts of light entering the courtyard, drift down like miniature constellations, settling on the wet stones and discarded scraps of cloth. You find yourself breathing in that mixture of sweet decay and sharp earthiness, feeling connected to every person who has breathed this same air before you. The communal aspect is ever present. Even when working alone at your station, you are part of a larger rhythm, the collective cycle of soaking, boiling, rinsing, and waiting. This knowledge transfer in the guild's corner reinforces that the dye is not just yours, it belongs to the community's enduring craft. As an hour passes, the sounds around you soften slightly. The sharp clinking of stone tools gives way to a steady rhythm. The gentle sloshing of water, the low murmur of shared observations about which root will work best with certain kinds of local cotton. You sit quietly, absorbing these lessons like the porous linen absorbs the deep blue stain. It is a meditation achieved through labor, an understanding that depth, whether in color or knowledge, requires time and unwavering attention to detail. The craft demands not brilliance, but consistency, not speed, but perfect pacing. The sense of calm settles over you. This rhythmic cycle of shared learning anchors your day, preparing the mind as diligently as the hands prepare the vat. You look at your own workspace, now seemingly infused with the unspoken protocols and accumulated wisdom of every dyer who has ever sat here. The blue is waiting, ready to be given form, supported by this deep cultural reservoir of patience. The damp morning air carries the lingering, earthy scent of fermenting mash and sun-baked mud bricks. You carry a bundle of newly dyed cloth from the quiet intimacy of your dye yard toward the main thoroughfare, moving slowly through the early hours when Timbuktu is just beginning to stir awake. The fabric feels cool and heavy in your hands, absorbing the faint chill of the pre-dawn air. Along your path, you pass stacked piles of tanned hide and bolts of undyed linen. You are not going into a shop or selling today, merely walking along the edge of the market proper allows you to observe the city's palette in its full spectrum. You notice how the morning light catches the various colors worn by the people passing by. There is the rich, deep ochre of stacked leather goods, pigments derived from dry earth and mineral stains, resistant and warm against the cool blues of your craft. You watch a merchant balancing baskets of dried spices, reds and yellows spilling over the edges, offering flashes of brutal color against the neutral browns of the dusty paths. Each color speaks to a different life, a different function within the complex web of trade. As you walk, your gaze lingers on specific details. The way a woman's veil catches the light, momentarily flashing a pale, natural cream, the vibrant contrast created by colored beads worn around an ankle, perhaps dyed with crushed berry stains. These small flashes of color are absorbed into the rhythm of your observation, reminding you that while blue is central to your life, it does not exist in isolation. You feel the subtle shift in temperature as you move from the shade cast by a tall building to the open expanse near the Niger trade route. The transition brings with it a change in air quality, perhaps bearing the faint whiff of river silt or wood smoke. You slow your pace, allowing your senses to catalog the scene fully. The market's edge is not a place of transaction for you today. It is an observatory. You observe how color dictates status and function among the people you pass. A certain deep shade of blue, perhaps slightly richer or more uniform than your current dye lot, belongs specifically to those who perform specific roles, guards, scholars, or high-ranking guild members. The presence of this particular hue seems to claim space, announcing a presence that is both stable and significant. You compare these observed status blues to the deep indigo clinging to your own work. You notice subtle differences. Some blues look almost black in certain lights, suggesting a dye process requiring greater duration or more potent preparation. Others have hints of green or violet undertones, pointing back to specific supporting botanicals used only by master dyers. The observation process forces you to consider the abstract nature of your own skill. The deep blue you create is not just from the indigo plant itself. It is a carefully constructed echo of many other ingredients: the tannins of the bark, the astringency of the roots, the stabilizing power drawn from accumulated community knowledge. It is a collaborative alchemy, materialized in fiber. You see bolts of textiles draped over stalls that boast colors you do not specialize in. Dusty terracotta reds derived perhaps from local clays, saffron yellows from plant matter processed with mineral salts. Yet, even these seemingly disparate hues are governed by the same laws of natural interaction and human patience that govern your own blue. They all require understanding the material world. The weight of the finished cloth against your arms becomes a steady, reassuring rhythm, grounding you in your specific expertise. You walk past groups of men discussing goods, their gestures punctuated by flashes of color. A colorful wrap thrown over one shoulder, the bright hue of dyed wool cuffs on another's arm. Each instance of color becomes a subtle data point for your mind. You consider how deeply embedded this study of color is in Mali's lifeblood. The movement of goods along the river, carried by boats and donkeys, brings with it stories and materials from far away. These trade routes mean that every color found here has traveled a distance, representing a journey just like your own indigo dye, a long, methodical passage from source to desired permanence. As you near a particular junction in the market's edge, you pause briefly, standing still amidst the gentle flow of life around you. You take a deep breath, breathing in the mixed scents: the dry dust, the sweet, slightly sour scent of fermenting dye that clings faintly to your skin, and the sharper notes of cooking spices from a nearby stall. This blend of odors defines your world. The constant background noise, the low murmur of voices, the rhythmic clop of sandals on packed earth the occasional bleating of livestock all contribute to a sense of deep, rooted time. Life moves here with an unhurried certainty, measured not by clock hands, but by the rising and setting of the sun and the completion of seasonal trade cycles. The blue you carry is more than just dye. It represents continuity. It signifies the enduring thread connecting your family's practice to the foundational structures of Timbuktu society. When you look at a passing person wearing deep indigo, you are not merely seeing a garment, you are witnessing an affiliation, a statement of place and knowledge that has been painstakingly built, vat by vat, through time and community dedication. You continue your walk, paying attention to the interplay between light and fabric. Where the sun angle catches the surface of your deep blue cloth, it does not merely reflect color. It seems to absorb and deepen it, revealing layers of richness that are difficult to capture fully in simple observation. This is why patience is your most valuable resource, to allow time itself to deepen the saturation, just as time has deepened the cultural significance of your dye. The gathering crowd near a water source slows your pace further. You observe children playing nearby, their laughter light and unpredictable against the solemn permanence of the market goods. The scene requires no immediate action from you, only quiet witnessing. This sustained observation is part of the rhythm, the necessary moment to let the sensory data settle, to file away the hues and contexts observed into the deep knowledge base that defines your professional life. The deep blue dye has been tended to all morning, the scent of fermentation and damp earth clinging to your clothes. Now, as the sun climbs higher, casting a wash of golden dust into the workyard, a different quiet settles over everything. The rhythmic motions slow down. You guide the cloth bundles from the cooling racks and carefully place them in a drying area near the open courtyard. You notice how the vibrant blue absorbs the light differently than the pale beige linen nearby. It holds the cool shadow of the dye even when touched by direct sun. Moving away from the tubs, you walk towards the communal eating space. The midday heat is not punishing yet, but it has a solid weight to it, wrapping around your shoulders and settling in your bones. You see bowls of cooked grains and root stews laid out on woven mats near the corner of the guild compound. This meal is simple, prepared by a relative or a neighboring craftsperson. It requires little fanfare, only necessity. You settle down onto a low bench, the woven straw slightly rough beneath you, watching as the preparation settles into a predictable rhythm. The scent changes immediately upon approaching the eating area. The sharp tang of the dye vat gives way to something earthy and comforting. Smoked grains, roasted tubers, perhaps a slight sweetness from boiled palm fruit. This transition in smell signals the pause, the necessary break between sustained labor and rest. You take your bowl, noticing the weight of the food and the casual efficiency with which it was set out for the collective. You do not eat immediately. Instead, You adopt a posture of quiet observation. Your hand rests near your bowl, but your gaze drifts outward. You are attuned to the sounds that define this space. The soft thump-thump as a distant worker moves heavy baskets, the gentle clinking of ceramic water pots being refilled, the low murmur of voices speaking in Manding dialects, conversations held at a near whisper. The air itself feels thick with accumulated smells and energies. It is a mix of wood smoke from cooking fires, sweat dried on skin, the mineral smell rising off the packed earth, and always, beneath it all, the deep, vegetal musk of the dye mash. These smells form the invisible signature of the dyer's quarter. As you begin to eat, slowly breaking bread, or scooping up the starchy grain mush, your focus narrows. You notice the texture of the food, the slight grit in the cooked grains, the soft yielding give of a root vegetable. Each bite requires deliberate attention, an act that pulls you entirely into the present moment. It is a grounding experience. In moments like this, when the body takes care of its needs and the senses are given permission to simply observe, the mind finds a natural settling place. Your eyes drift past the immediate vicinity of the courtyard. You watch how the light behaves. Where it strikes the dust motes suspended in the midday air, they seem almost golden and dancing, invisible until caught by a sudden beam. It is a small, mesmerizing detail that momentarily halts any lingering thoughts about knots to tie or vats to clean. Across the way, perhaps through an opening in the earthen walls, you observe the slow passage of life. Outside the guild compound, you might see a donkey loaded with goods moving along the main track, leading away from Timbuktu's heart. The animal moves with an ancient, steady purpose. Its load is secured with sturdy ropes, and its gait tells a story of distance covered, not speed. This sight reminds you that your meticulous work, confined to these walls by specialized knowledge, connects directly to vast networks beyond the city gates, to the salt mines in the north, and the markets of the forest south. The contemplation is subtle. How the stability of this deep blue stain, derived from local patience and persistent labor, finds its echo in the resilience of trade itself. The materials you work with, the indigo leaves, the barks, the root fibers, are tied to cycles that repeat year after year, far removed from the momentary urgency of human ambition. You lift your gaze back to the immediate vicinity. You notice the pattern of shadow cast by the roof eaves overhead. These shadows shift imperceptibly as the sun progresses across its arc. They draw geometric patterns on the packed earth floor, a visual clock marking the passing time in quiet, silent strokes. The communal act of simply existing together, sharing this simple meal while surrounded by the tools and the potent scent of your craft, feels less like a break and more like an essential continuation. It is here, nourished by basic sustenance and granted a brief window for contemplation, that the deep meaning of the work resurfaces. The blue you create is not merely color. It is history rendered tangible, requiring time, knowledge passed from hand to hand, and absolute patience. This pause allows that profound understanding to settle into your bones, making the complex work of dyeing feel less like a series of demanding tasks and more like a continuous, quiet dialogue with tradition itself. When you finish your meal, there is no rush to stand up or return to boiling cauldrons. You simply sit for another moment, absorbing the ambient rhythm, the slow breathing of the life around you, the patient settling of dust, the enduring deep blue awaiting its next embrace in the cooling vats. This quiet observation is itself a vital part of the process, preparing your mind as carefully as you prepare the fabric. The deep concentration of working within the walls, surrounded by the steam and pungent smells of fermentation, sometimes demands a shift in perspective. The knowledge you carry is too rich to be kept only among the dye vats. It must connect back to its source, the earth itself. When the labor becomes too intensely focused indoors, you understand the necessity of venturing out, not for novelty, but for maintenance. You must go where the blue begins. Slowly, you begin the journey away from the clamor and the practiced rhythm of the dye workshop. The goal is simple: to gather what your craft requires, returning not with treasure, but with quiet knowledge of place. You follow worn paths that lead out past the outer edge of the settlement, where the woven matting of walls gives way to open, sun-baked earth. The air here changes immediately. It loses the damp, yeasty thickness of the dye compound, becoming dry and warm, carrying the scent of dust mixed with distant heat and wild grasses. You walk slowly, mindful of your steps on ground that feels different beneath your worn sandals. It is firmer, less trampled by foot traffic than the paths near the market gates. You are not rushing. The task demands patience, a physical manifestation of the patience required for the dye itself. Your movement becomes an observation exercise. You notice how the shadows cast by small acacia trees stretch long and thin across the ground as the sun climbs toward its zenith. The light is different out here. It is brighter, harsher than the diffused glow inside your compound, illuminating every speck of fine dust suspended in the warm air. You move toward the semi-wild growth that marks the edge of cultivation. Here, nestled among thicker bushes and tougher scrub, you find the plant matter you need. Wild indigo. It grows differently from the nurtured plants within the organized garden plots. This blue source carries a more rugged character. You stop near a cluster of these leaves, their veins dark against the muted green backdrop. You kneel slowly on the dry ground, feeling the grit settle around your knees. The scent here is completely different from the fermentation pits. It is clean and vegetal, overlaid with the sharp, earthy smell of sun-baked soil. You reach out a hand, not to pluck immediately, but simply to feel the texture of the leaves, the slightly waxy coating on some, the rougher quality on others. You are reading them, understanding which ones have reached optimal maturity for harvest. The process requires deep botanical knowledge, something learned from generations watching the subtle signs in nature. You examine the stem structure and the way the leaflets curve. These details tell you more than a simple identification name. The wild plants possess certain compounds that require specific harvesting methods to ensure the necessary pigment is intact. It is an alchemy of timing. You begin gathering, selecting only what is needed, respecting the surrounding growth. Each leaf or small branch is carefully chosen and placed into a woven basket worn across your arm. You work with deliberate slowness, pausing often to observe the details, the slight imperfections on a petal, the way morning dew, if present, will cling momentarily before evaporating in the strong heat. You think about the cycle that this labor represents, the life giving off its pigment back to the earth, and your skilled hands acting as temporary conduits, gathering that essence. It is a profound connection between the immediate need of your craft and the endless renewal provided by the surrounding landscape. The journey continues slowly, following faint trails toward a spot near a small trickling stream, even if it is not the main river. The soundscape changes to incorporate the natural sounds, the chirping of insects in the dense undergrowth, the occasional distant call of a bird, and the whispery rustle of your gathered materials. These background rhythms are comforting, acting as an auditory balm after the rhythmic clanks and stirs of the dye workshop. The stream edge offers a cooling reprieve from the intensifying heat. You spend time by the bank's margin, allowing the coolness to seep into your sandals and ankles. You observe the interplay between water and mud, the way the current carves patterns into the soft silt, suggesting continuous, unstoppable change. This observation brings you back to your dye work, the constant state of saturation and gradual transformation, mirrored in the slow movement of the water. You feel a quiet gratitude for this natural replenishment. It is not just the indigo source that matters here, but the perspective it offers, the reminder that the most powerful colors often emerge from the simplest, undisturbed corners of the land. The raw materials are silent, patient, and endlessly generative. When your gathering is complete and the basket feels heavy with potential, you turn your steps back toward the community. The walk back feels charged with a different kind of energy, not the exhaustion of physical labor, but the gentle weight of accumulated knowledge and necessity. As you move away from the open fields, passing through small villages that are merely extensions of the larger trade routes, you observe the lives lived in contrast to your own specialized craft. People walk by, carrying goods, or simply traveling, their clothes speaking a language of use and status, but none speak the unique, silent language of the deep indigo. The return signals the shift back into the structured, communal rhythms of your life. The wildness gives way once more to the controlled environment of the guild compound. You know that this quiet journey outside has renewed not only your physical supply, but also your inner calibration. This time spent sourcing the silence reinforces the core understanding that your dye is not just a color. It is a carefully managed conversation between human skill and natural time. The blue awaits its second transformation back in the controlled warmth of the workshop. The work has shifted today, subtly. The rhythm of the vat remains the same, the slosh of liquid, the steady cool dampness on your palms, but the air holds a different quality. It is not just the smell of fermentation and tannin now. There are whispers threading through it. You notice that some of the younger dyers stand slightly closer to one woman than others, their gazes fixed upon her hands, which move with an almost deliberate economy. She does not speak loudly, but when she bends over a basin or traces a pattern on wet cloth, the movement carries the weight of many years. Today, you feel drawn into that quiet space around tradition. You watch as your guild master, perhaps Amadou, gestures toward a corner of the compound where some very old tools rest: carved wooden mixing paddles, ancient grinding stones covered in patina, and bundles of dried roots tied with sinew string. These objects are more than merely equipment. They feel like repositories of time itself. You realize that the blue you create is not just from leaves and process. It is built upon these inherited gestures. Later, as you are rinsing a batch of cloth fibers, the rhythmic scrape of the woven mats against the stone basin, your attention falls upon an old man, perhaps named Issa, who sits nearby. He is whittling a small piece of dark wood with painstaking care. You observe his hands, gnarled and powerful, yet moving with the surprising delicacy of fine art. He looks up at you occasionally, not in a way that demands attention, but simply to acknowledge your presence within the shared space. He does not talk about dye recipes immediately. Instead, he speaks first of patterns. You notice how some people carry certain items, a specific knot on their belt, or the pattern dyed into the hem of their tunic. And the story that goes with those details is often unspoken, passed only through observance and memory. The deep indigo you work with has always been more than just a color here in Timbuktu. It is a signpost. It marks profession, sometimes lineage, sometimes even protective status. You are reminded of what your ancestors taught you about the sacredness of the dye vat itself. It is understood that when the proper rituals are overlooked, the correct prayers whispered at dawn, or the patience required during fermentation, the color will be weak, fleeting, almost dishonest. This knowledge links your daily labor to a much larger tapestry: the stories of the Niger River trade, the history of the great scholars who passed through this market, and the enduring belief in the power of natural processes. The air begins to grow heavier as the midday heat reaches its peak. You move from rinsing large cloths into a small area where an elder is overseeing the careful bundling of freshly stained material. This elder explains something about the way certain dyes were used historically, not just for fashion, but for ceremonial protection. He points out that specific bands, or geometric marks imbued in the blue cloth are believed to repel ill fortune, linking the visual beauty directly to a deep sense of security and community well-being. You sit on a low stool, letting your fingers trail over a finished piece of fabric. The blue is so deep here, it seems almost liquid when held up to the light, a color that absorbs all surrounding hues. You reflect on how this permanence of color reflects something else, the endurance of knowledge itself. Just as the vat holds the volatile compounds waiting for patience and time before transforming into stable, enduring blue, the community preserves its traditions, the oral histories, the medicinal uses, the specific rituals, waiting for the right moment to be shared. This is not merely a craft. It feels like a living library. The knowledge required to maintain the perfect pH level of the mash, understanding which tannins complement the indigo, and knowing the proper sequence of mordants. These are complex details that only years spent within this compound reveal. They cannot be written down easily. They must be lived. The elder then shifts his focus toward lineage. He explains how certain guilds or families specializing in specific types of dye preparation might carry a particular knowledge. Perhaps one family is best at stabilizing the color for textiles intended for the great scholars, while another excels at roots used only for ceremonial banners. This specialization creates bonds far tighter than simple commerce. It links skilled labor to identity and reputation. You listen quietly, absorbing the weight of these whispers. The stories weave together. The blue that signifies wealth derived from trade routes, the deep indigo that marks a scholar's garment, and the specific patterns that connect the wearer not just to Timbuktu, but to an ancient belief system protecting it. You see how every step, from collecting the wild leaves in Chapter 7 to boiling them precisely in Chapter 2, is imbued with this cultural weight. The meticulous process is a form of reverence. The connection between dyeing and memory becomes clear. To lose knowledge of how to create that perfect blue would be more than just a commercial setback. It would risk severing a thread from the community's historical self-understanding. The dye vat, therefore, must always be maintained, not just chemically, but spiritually, filled with respect and careful attention. The afternoon draws on, and your small tasks continue: washing, sorting, hanging threads to dry. But every action is performed now with a newfound depth of understanding. You are not merely an artisan following instructions. You are a custodian of lore. The simple act of dipping the cloth feels charged, weighted by generations of shared experience, making the blue stain less about botany and more about permanence itself. This knowledge, passed down through careful observation and gentle instruction, is your most valuable commodity, far exceeding any weight measured in gold dust passing through the city gates. The rhythm continues, slow and meditative, grounded now not just by the boiling pots, but by the timeless stories that cling to the vapor and the cool, damp fabric. The sun has passed its highest point in the sky, and now, slowly, it begins its slide toward the western horizon. The intense heat that gripped the compound during the day softens into a diffused warmth. You feel the slight coolness creeping into your skin as the air changes, carrying with it the scent of dust settling and cooling earth. The first task of the late hours is the final rinsing. The dye process leaves residue everywhere in the basins, on the grinding stones, on your fingers. Yet there is a carefulness to this last wash-up, for the finished cloth must be treated with the utmost respect. You gather the pieces that have undergone the deep blue transformation. They are still damp, heavier than raw cotton, possessing the faint but undeniable metallic smell of fermenting minerals and deep plant life. You carry them slowly toward the washing area, an open space near the compound wall where the runoff collects. The water here is much cooler now, drawn from a lower source, perhaps a slow seep or a runoff channel that has kept its chill through the day's heat. You do not plunge the cloths back into the vats. This final stage requires a gentle stewardship. You begin by carefully dipping the first garment into the running water. The fabric accepts the coolness immediately, seeming to sigh around you. As it emerges, you notice how the blue does not simply coat the surface, but seems integrated deep within the weave itself, sinking into the warp and the weft in a liquid echo of color. There is an ingrained knowledge in your fingertips, developed over years of handling this specific textile. You cup the cloth gently, feeling its weight. It feels substantial, solid, as if it has absorbed not just water, but time itself. The blue you have created here today was patient work, beginning with roots and barks harvested weeks ago, boiling slowly under firelight, being immersed in a mash that required constant monitoring. You remember the hours spent stirring the vats before dawn, when the world slept beneath a blanket of stars. As you rinse, your focus becomes intensely localized. You study the patterns on one piece, a section where it met the water flow deepest, and another area that may have been held slightly higher during the drying phase. Some parts hold a deeper saturation than others. Some folds appear almost velvety in the fading light, catching it with a muted brilliance. You work slowly, scrubbing gently at certain spots with your palm, not to remove color, but seemingly to awaken it, to make you aware of its texture and permanence. The running water carries away the loose particles, the tannins, the residual starch, the last whispers of the dye's chemical process. These departing traces tell a story, a tale of transformation, of chemistry refined by human patience. You move methodically from piece to piece, laying them out on clean racks that are sheltered from direct moonlight, but still exposed enough for the night air to perform its subtle work. Each cloth is unique. No two absorb the dye identically. One might show a slight variation in tone across the shoulder versus the hemline, a silent map drawn by gravity and water. Under the shifting quality of the late afternoon light, you inspect these nuances. You are not just inspecting textiles, you are assessing history, livelihood, and reputation. The color speaks volumes before any merchant even looks at it. A poorly rinsed cloth, still bearing mineral residue, would show dull spots when inspected closely. A successful rinse means the blue is pure, deep, and unwavering. You pause occasionally, simply to gather your thoughts among the draped cloths. The scent of the washing area now mixes with the cooler night air. Wet earth, residual vegetal matter, and that characteristic, calming mineral-sweet smell of indigo. It is a cyclical aroma, one that smells both entirely temporary, like water running away, and eternally present, like the core of Mali itself. The careful placement of each cloth speaks to the understanding of how drying happens in this specific microclimate. You angle them so the moonlight catches the folds just right at dawn tomorrow, ensuring they receive the full benefit of the cool night breezes that dry slowly and evenly, preventing any harsh warping or creasing from excessive exposure. As you finish rinsing the last garment, you wipe your hands on a piece of scrap cloth, leaving the stain of indigo dye. It is a mark of identity, marking you as someone who works with depth and enduring beauty. You look over the collection, the deep blues hanging patiently in the twilight, and feel the quiet satisfaction of completion. The labor of the day was intense, skillful, and profoundly dedicated to the alchemy of patience. You know that this wash-up is not merely cleaning. It is a final act of care, ensuring that the color you have coaxed from nature will endure for generations, carrying with it the slow weight of your family's deep knowledge and commitment to the craft. The cooling night settles around the compound, bringing with it a profound sense of rest, promising another cycle when the sun rises to reveal its enduring blue. The final task of the day begins quietly, a rhythm that moves in sync with the settling dust and the cooling air. You begin by gathering the scattered tools from your work area near the vat. There are the heavy wooden stirring sticks, worn smooth over generations of use, the woven mats used for separating the liquids, the small bowls that held mordants. You stack them methodically, placing each object back in its correct place within the workshop corner. This physical cleanup is a quiet meditation, turning the chaos of preparation into a neat order for the coming day. The tools themselves seem to absorb the damp blue stain faintly, carrying the memory of the dye's potent magic. You notice how the deep indigo mash has settled now that the boiling fires are banked. It is less energetic than at midday, taking on a velvety stillness. You sweep up any residual specks of plant matter and spent bark dust from the earth floor around the vat's edge. The earthy scent of damp clay mixes with the faint, lingering sharpness of fermented indigo, a smell that speaks entirely of patient labor. As you finish tidying the workspace, Your focus shifts outward, drawn by the inevitable descent of night. The brilliant wash of late afternoon light is giving way to a softer, deepening mauve across the sky. You gather any residual liquid waste and dispose of it carefully according to guild practice, mindful not to contaminate the soil excessively. Leaving the workshop, you move slowly toward your family's dwelling area, where the scent changes again. The sharpness of plant matter recedes, replaced by the fainter, comforting aromas of cooking oils, wood smoke, and cooling earth. You settle down in a quiet space just outside the main clustered dwellings, finding a spot on a woven mat beneath the overhang of some drying thatch. You sit slowly, allowing your muscles to release the tension built up throughout the long hours of careful work. You breathe deeply, drawing in the cool air that carries with it the promise of nighttime stillness. The glow of Timbuktu at night is not a sudden outburst, but a slow brightening from within the flicker of an oil lamp, the muted light spilling from doorways. These small pockets of warmth provide contrast to the vast expanse of deepening indigo visible above and beyond the city walls. You look up. The transition in the sky is breathtakingly gradual. The last hints of orange are being consumed by a wash of cool twilight blue. You observe how these different shades of blue reappear, linking the temporary color shift in the air to the deep permanence of the dye you work with. The rhythm slows further. Your fingers trace small patterns on the rough weave of your lap, remembering the countless times they have handled raw, absorbent cotton, felt the wet weight of saturated linen, grappled with the smooth, viscous mash. Each texture, each touch, holds a memory of effort and skill. Sleep in this place is not merely an absence of consciousness. It is an extension of the deep stillness required by your craft. It is a period of quiet storage for the knowledge you hold, the exact measure of root needed, the precise time the fermentation must be checked, the perfect folding pattern of freshly dyed fabric. You watch a small group gathered nearby who have settled in for the night. Their movements are slow and economical, settling into the established rhythm of communal rest. The only sounds are the gentle chirping of crickets, the distant clatter of cooking pots cooling down, and the soft whisper of the desert breeze moving over the piled drying cloths. This sensory input, the blend of natural sound, the cool night air on your skin, the way the moonlight begins to touch the roofs nearby, all contributes to a feeling of profound continuity. Your life is deeply woven into this rhythm, preparation at dawn, intense labor by day, and quiet reflection under the stars at night. The cycle feels ancient, almost elemental. You think about how far back this process goes, how countless generations of dyers have understood the language of plant matter and water to achieve this singular color. Your mastery is not just a trade. It is a continuation of memory itself, held within the chemistry of the vat. You gently rub your hands together, warming them slightly despite the coolness in the air. The deep blue stains that are waiting for dawn's dye bath seem to resonate with the quiet starlight overhead, suggesting depth and untold histories. You breathe slowly, accommodating the rise and fall of the cool night. There is no tension here, only a profound settling. The thought enters your mind, unbidden. All this painstaking attention to one color, this remarkable blue, is itself an act of patience, teaching you that permanence does not come quickly, but through slow, reliable cycles. You let the coolness of the night seep into your clothes, a gentle blanket against the end of your day's work. You observe the silhouettes of the nearby buildings, their shapes softened by the approaching starlight, making the boundaries between object and sky seem wonderfully indistinct. The vastness above, filled with scattered points of eternal light, seems to mirror the deep, enduring quality of your blue dye, a color that captures both the infinite night and the deepest reserves of earth. You feel yourself settling deeper into the quiet moments, drawing sustenance from the silence. As your awareness begins to soften, the noises of Timbuktu fade down to a comforting hum. The aroma of the cool night air replaces the sharp scent of indigo. You are anchored here, in this moment between labor and rest, under the vast witness of the stars, readying yourself for the silent promise that dawn will bring.